Welcome to Career Uprising. I'm your host and professional career coach, Lorraine Rise. Join me as I guide you through an amazing journey of self-discovery and empowerment. If you are looking for work, changing careers, or stuck in a toxic job, then this is the show for you. I offer both practical and spiritual guidance to help you up-level and advance your career. Let's start the uprising. Hey everyone, you are listening to episode 98, Overcoming Self-Sabotage with Dr. Candice Seti. So before we get started, as I always say, please take a moment and hit subscribe on Apple Podcasts or however you like to listen. But I would love if you would subscribe to the show so that you never miss it. I come out with a new episode about every other Monday. It's always on a Monday, and I try to do 2 a month as regularly as I can. And so I would appreciate your rating and review as well. It helps the show very much. So I have another phenomenal guest today. I'm really excited. Dr. Candice Seti is in the studio today, and I'm going to tell you just a little bit about her. And, you know, she has such an interesting tie-in to my own background. So I'll tell you about that in a second too. But Dr. Seti is a California licensed clinical psychologist. And I think this is cool because I've never had a psychologist on our show before. This is a first, and I think it's going to be very enlightening. But she's also a certified nutrition coach and personal trainer. She has deep expertise in applying cognitive therapy to weight loss and weight management. So you might be wondering, what does this have to do with my career? And as it turns out, a lot. And the tie-in that I want to make here is a lot of listeners may or may not know, I actually got my start in the nutrition field. I had my bachelor's degree in nutrition when I graduated college, and I also went into weight loss. And I worked for Jenny Craig Weight Loss Centers for a number of years and launched my career there. And it was actually at that job that I fell in love with coaching and mentoring employees in their careers. And that time in weight loss counseling and management really was the segue and the springboard into the career that I have now, because I found myself using a lot of coaching skills and counseling people on lifestyle changes, and self-sabotage is absolutely one of those. So and I'm a firm believer too, that the patterns in one area of your life, so your health, your nutrition, losing weight, those are all the same patterns and habits in every other area of your life. That's why my work in nutrition was so applicable to becoming a career coach, because I'm still coaching people on the same techniques and the same habits. And it makes sense because you're the same person in every area of your life. You're the same person at work, really, that you are at home, and that you are in terms of your eating and your social relationships and everything. It's still you. So I very much believe in coaching the whole person in my practice and recognizing that this is a whole well-rounded person, not just a career. Career coaching is life coaching, and it's also applicable to your health and wellness and relationships. It's all the same thing. So a lot of what Dr. Seti is going to talk about today is absolutely applicable to your career. And we're going to apply it to that. We're going to talk through some examples. And I think that you're going to see how clear her work is in crossing over into career coaching, and overcoming self-sabotage is just so critical, and it's so pervasive in our society. But she is the expert on that. So I'm going to let her come on in just a moment. But I want you to consider some of these scenarios in terms of self-sabotage in your career, because these are a few of the things that I see as a coach. Have you ever avoided applying for a job or a promotion out of fear of rejection? That's self-sabotage. Have you ever put off job search activity because it just seemed futile or a waste of time, or you just were procrastinating? That's self-sabotage. Have you ever stayed in a toxic job that was unhealthy for you and you know it, but you just stay there, maybe out of fear or complacency. That's self-sabotage. And so it's absolutely something that shows up in careers and that I work through with clients. So those are just a few examples, but I want to bring Candice on in just a moment and have her really do a deep dive into this concept, which we really haven't talked about that much. I'm so excited that this is really kind of an area that we've kind of flirted with on the show, but not really talked about head on. And I think this is going to be great. So let me bring her on now. Welcome to the show, Candice.
Thank you so much for having me. What a great intro.
Oh, thank you. I pride myself on those. I've had other guests tell me that.
Great.
Thank you. I have a rule on my show. I don't read bios. I just don't. Like straight up, I don't copy and paste and read bios. I refuse to do it.
I love it.
Because I feel like I should know my guests and I want to. So it's just a thing I have. So thank you for that.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, so why don't you tell our listeners first a little bit about you, your background, and how you got into doing the work that you're doing today?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I think, like you said, I am, first and foremost, a licensed clinical psychologist. I have a private practice and then I have an online coaching practice. And I specialize in weight management and weight loss therapy. And I got into that field as a result of my own experiences with weight loss and my own personal frustration with diets and understanding how the yo-yo dieting phenomenon is so rampant and how diet culture sets us up for that. And I wanted to find another way to approach that and to help others approach that. And what I very quickly found is that just like myself, almost everybody that struggles to maintain their weight or to lose weight doesn't struggle because they don't know how to be healthy. They struggle because they self-sabotage. Almost everybody knows, a cookie is healthier than an apple, but we still choose the cookie more often than not. And why do we do that? And the answer tends to come down to self-sabotage. So my focus on weight management really was just a specific application of addressing self-sabotage. And with my weight management clients, we ended up addressing self-sabotage in so many other areas of their life as well. Because as you said in your wonderful intro, you're the same person in every other aspect of your life, right? So in that process, essentially, my work started to shift gears from being solely focused on weight management to really being focused on self-sabotage in all aspects of life. And that's a little bit more of what I focus on now. I still have the weight management specialization, but I see people and work on self-sabotage essentially in all aspects of their life.
Yeah, as we're going to talk about, it's incredibly common and normal, really, and pervasive. I have struggled with it. Absolutely.
Everybody has.
Yeah. Everybody does. And if they think they're not, they're lying. Everybody does. So I think the first thing that we need to address is, what is self-sabotage? How would you define it?
Well, very simply put, I'd call it standing in your own way. Really preventing yourself from achieving what you want. If you were able to say, I want X, and I am actively engaging in behaviors that prevent me from achieving that, that is self-sabotage, right? You gave some good examples about, not applying for jobs for fear of rejection or putting off job hunting because it just feels like a wasted time. And all of these are things that ultimately prevent you from achieving what you want, right? You want a job, you want a good job, and you're actively engaging in behaviors that prevent you from achieving that. So that's what self-sabotage is, engaging in behaviors that essentially move you further from your goal as opposed to closer.
Absolutely. And, as you're saying this, I'm thinking, when you say engaging in behaviors that prevent you from reaching your goals, it sounds so simple. I think, well, why would anyone do that? That just sounds awful. Like, why would we do this? But we do. So, and you talk about this in your book, and I want you to talk about your book in just a moment, because I've been reading it. And in the introduction, or one of the early pages, you talk about how it's not that simple, that I want to go from A to B. It seems like it should be, right? It seems like it should be, okay, I'm here.
It definitely seems like
I want to
that,
go there. Yeah, let me do that. But it is not that simple. Our brains are complex, and there's a lot going on in our brain that is affecting our behavior. And I'm wondering if you can speak to, why is life not that simple? Why is it so prevalent that we sabotage ourselves when we know what we want and we know what to do? Do you know what I mean? Like, what is going on in our brains that is making it so hard?
Oh, gosh.
I'm asking for myself, too, if you hadn't noticed.
How much time do you have? Because I could talk about that all day. I actually have several chapters in the book devoted to answering that question. When you talk about why do we do this, right? Doesn't make any sense on paper. Why would we take on behaviors that prevent us from achieving what we want instead of moving us towards it? And there are so many reasons, and I'll kind of cover a few of them that are coming top of mind. But, one of them is something called cognitive distortions or thinking errors. So much of our self-sabotage is rooted in our thinking, right? It's all about the ways we think about things and integrate information and process information. But self-sabotage almost always involves distortions of the truth, which is this concept in cognitive psychology called cognitive distortions. And it's a way that we sort of apply these pre-existing schemas to information to fit into our mode of thinking. So, for example, somebody might be a black and white, all or nothing thinker. So they take information in the outside world and put it into all or nothing terms for themselves. Or they may be a catastrophizer. Maybe they take situations in the outside world and they put them in catastrophic tones for themselves. And that's how they think. But all of these things are cognitive distortions. And they are habitual. They develop very young and then they become habit. And we just do them. Our brain just goes to them. We have synapses in our brain that just connect the dots according to the mode of thinking. And this just sets us up to engage in self-sabotaging behavior because we're not looking at things through a realistic lens. We're looking at them through these irrational distortions that our brain set us up for. So those thinking errors are definitely one of the really common reasons that we self-sabotage. But there are a lot of other things that go into it. One of them is anxiety. Anxiety in and of itself is sort of its own little form of self-sabotage, which, by the way, doesn't mean that if you engage in self-sabotage, you have an anxiety disorder. But some level of anxiety can easily instigate and perpetuate self-sabotaging behaviors. And the most common way that we respond to anxiety is with avoidance, which is very common in many different self-sabotage styles. And so we avoid situations that cause us anxiety. We avoid situations that maybe are scary or, that are uncomfortable for us. And this is a result of anxiety and also a way that we foster anxiety. So, over time, these responses can actually trigger more anxiety, creating a little bit of a chicken or egg relationship between anxiety and self-sabotage, where you don't know if you're anxious because you're self-sabotaging or if you're self-sabotaging due to anxiety. So anxiety can go hand in hand with it. Self-esteem is a big factor tied into self-sabotaging behaviors. Again, going back to some of the examples you gave at the beginning, you could see how some of those could be fostered by issues with self-esteem. So, our personal levels of self-esteem determine whether we feel we're deserving of things, right? If we have low self-esteem, we might not feel we're deserving of love or happiness or success. And so we may actively stop ourselves from engaging in behaviors that give us those things simply because we feel we're not deserving. And, again, with self-esteem and self-sabotage, you see the same chicken and egg relationship where one can cause the other, right? Low self-esteem can cause you to self-sabotage, but self-sabotage can also cause low self-esteem, because if you continue to self-sabotage and not let yourself achieve your goals, you're going to start to feel bad about yourself. You can start to feel pretty crappy about your capabilities, and that can become more and more deeply rooted, right, until it becomes unclear which is causing the other. So those are some of the overarching causes, but I usually like to drill down with people because I feel the deeper level stuff is about fear. And I talk about fear of change. I talk about fear of success. And I talk about fear of failure. And those three fears are usually the things that we can kind of drill down to with just about everybody, right? Whether they're self-sabotaging because of thinking errors, like I mentioned, or anxiety or low self-esteem, or any of the other reasons that I highlight in the book, it almost always comes down to fear. And so that's really the thing that needs to get looked at and addressed if you want to change that behavior.
Absolutely. I think fear is really at the root of a lot of the self-sabotage and with the coaching. And I think it's interesting that you said fear of success, because I was just talking to a client a couple of weeks ago about that I threw that out there, that I thought that was what was going on. And she was like, what? And I'm like, yeah, people are afraid of success. You're afraid of...
It's a strange concept, right?
It is, but you're afraid of who you'll have to be if this actually works out. I'm going to have to show up. Am I ready to be that person? I've had fear of success in building my business and things like that. It's, and I think in weight loss too, I don't know, maybe you'll see this. I saw a lot of clients who had enough courage to book a call, but showing up, that was too much, right? Like you get courage in kind of incremental, because I think they're afraid that if they go, then they're going to commit to it. And if they're going to commit to it, then they're going to have to change, and change is hard. So if I just stay here, maybe, and I don't succeed, like then the expectations won't increase, even your own self expectations. So
absolutely.
Yeah, we keep ourselves small because we're actually afraid of being successful and the person we will need to become and to change, So it makes a lot of sense to me. And so I love this. So it sounds to me like it really comes down to patterns of thinking that we have been taught, perhaps, or adopted. So are these things that are conditioned from childhood? Do we kind of pick up these distorted patterns of thinking, or are they biological, natural, or they're? So go ahead. You think they're really from kind of childhood and ingrained?
I think they're formed very early on and then reinforced. Right. So look at something like anxious behavior or avoidant behavior, right? Avoidance is something you see a lot in people who are looking to find a job, change careers, whatever it may be. And avoidant behavior is, people who kind of keep themselves away from situations or environments that can cause them anxiety or push them outside of their comfort zone. And so, an example of this might be somebody saying, like you mentioned, I'm not going to apply to that job because I probably won't get it anyway. And, or I'm not going to put myself out there for fear of rejection. But because they don't engage in that behavior, because they actually avoid that behavior, they also believe that they've avoided the negative outcomes that may have come from that behavior. So even though they don't have evidence to support that, they've reinforced that behavior because they think they've prevented something negative from happening, right? If they believed that there was going to be rejection involved, they've prevented themselves from experiencing that rejection by not applying, and therefore they've done something good for themselves. They've prevented that negative experience, and that reinforces itself without actually having anything have to happen, right? It's just thinking that you're avoiding something that reinforces that behavior. So these thinking patterns develop early on, but then they very easily get reinforced by things not happening as opposed to, things happening. So it's very easy to get stuck in those patterns.
I work through that with clients as well. And I like to play a game called What's the Worst That's Going to Happen? And so they kind of tell me what they're afraid of or what they're avoiding. And I say, okay, so hit me with it. What is the absolute worst case scenario that you are afraid of? Let's just address it head on. Like, tell me what you're afraid of. And they'll tell me, and then I want to know, okay, so how likely is it that that's really going to happen? Tomorrow when you wake up, XYZ is going to happen. And it's like calling their bluff a little bit. Like, they know it's not really going to happen. So I say, are you afraid of? What do you really think is going to happen? Let's prepare for that. Whatever the worst case scenario is, let's prepare for it. And then it almost never happens. And I want them to kind of see that, to address that fear directly and prepare yourself for that outcome, but it rarely ever happens. So I think that I think you make a lot of really good points here. So my one question too is, so we've defined what self-sabotage is and kind of where it comes from. But what I notice is that not everyone realizes that they are sabotaging themselves. So, for example, a lot of people will blame outside people and circumstances for, why they didn't get the job or why they're not achieving their goals. So I think people deal with this, but they don't know how to label it that, or they don't realize that that's what's going on. How can people better recognize that that is what they are dealing with? They are sabotaging themselves if they're not aware of that. Is there any cues or anything they can do? Go ahead.
It's really about looking at and analyzing your own behavior. So if you have a goal and you are focused on that goal, you need to constantly be looking at what you're doing and continually asking yourself, is what I'm doing moving me closer to that or further away from that? Is what I'm doing helping me achieve that or preventing me from achieving that? Because even in that scenario, when you have the person or individual that's blaming other people and circumstances, which happens quite a lot with self-sabotage, they still have to look at the actions that they took in response to what they perceive to be outside influence. They're still making decisions. They're still engaging in behavior. And so even in that scenario where they're blaming others, if they are actively looking at everything they do, every step they take or step they don't take, and asking themselves, is that moving me closer to my goal or further from my goal? Is that helping me achieve what I want or preventing me from achieving what I want? As long as they're continually looking at and questioning it, they'll be able to find those behavioral patterns.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's what coaching and counseling that you and I both do is so good for, is helping people to see themselves objectively and to come out of themselves for a little while, even just for a minute. You get to go back in when we're done, okay? But just for a minute. I want you to come out of your current thought pattern.
Yeah.
And see yourself.
And the more focus on that, the more people start to do it on their own.
Yes. So it's a skill and a muscle that you learn to flex. And I think that the coaching and counseling process is so good for that, is showing people their own thoughts and behaviors outside of their own psyche and judgments and opinions about themselves, and teaching people self-awareness, really.
Yes, definitely.
And I think it's something that's very hard to do on your own. And I think that's why having that other trained person in there can be, who isn't, a spouse or something like that,
Somebody's got some objectivity.
Right. Come in and kind of hold a mirror up to what you're saying and what you're thinking and believing, and question all of it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
100% agree.
This is really powerful stuff. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about your book? Tell us what it's called, where we can find it, and what can readers expect to gain and learn in going through your book?
Sure. It's the Self-Sabotage Behavior Workbook. And it's really a guidebook for people who are wanting to improve in any area: health and wellness, relationships, career, finances, whatever it may be. And it's broken down into a few different sections. It starts by helping readers understand what behaviors actually fall under the category of self-sabotage and how this behavior develops and reinforces itself, something, you and I have just touched on a bit. And then it helps them learn how their own personal self-sabotage is impeding their growth, and in what specific areas their self-sabotage is standing in the way of their overall wellness. And then the last section has them go through this step-by-step process of fighting their self-sabotage and developing new healthy behavior patterns to achieve success in whatever area of life they're wanting to achieve it in. And it's in a workbook format to do a lot of what you just talked about when you talked about coaching and counseling, right? To help people stop right after every chapter, to stop and really reflect objectively and integrate the information into their own lives and really start to consider the individual reasons for their behavior. So it's not quite as much of a one-size-fits-all format, because each chapter has the reader kind of going through and looking at their own behavior and applying what they've learned to their own behavior. So it's a really good way to take people through step by step a lot of what I would do typically in private practice with individuals that I work with.
I think I'm guilty of the black and white thinking. I've been flipping through because I feel I do that sometimes, especially with like finding time to work out in the morning. It's like, I feel like, God, I should really just be all in on this or just not do it. I mean, come on. Like, I'm either going to do it every day or I'm not going to do it. And I'm realizing maybe I shouldn't think that way. Maybe I should just get in what I can and forgive myself for the other times that I can't.
Yes, well, it's a really, really common example for use with exercise. You see that all the time where people say, I have to work out 6 days a week for an hour. And if I can't, well, then I might as well just not work out at all. And, we know objectively that's not very logical, right? I mean, working out 4 times this week or 3 times this week still is pretty good and gives you 3 workouts. And, even if you can't get in the 6 that you plan, there still is value in that. Or even if you can't get in an hour workout and one day you can only get in 20 minutes, there's still value in exercising for 20 minutes. So looking at all the gray that exists in between that black and white helps people understand the balance, right? I mean, I'm not going to apply for any job because I didn't get this one job, right? Or, I'm not even going to look because why would they hire me? It's just like lumping yourself into these 2 extremes and not embracing the fact that there's a whole world of gray in between.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I absolutely love this. And I know I could talk about it for hours, but you and I are probably one of the only ones. I know. I could geek out on this stuff, but we do need to wrap up, but I want you to let our listeners know where can they go to learn more about you and your work and to purchase your book.
Sure. Well, of course, anywhere you buy books, you can go to Amazon for the book, but there are links on my websites as well. I have 2 websites. One is meonlybetter.com, which is my private practice site. And then I have theweightlosstherapist.com, which is for my online coaching and DIY programs. And there are links to reach out to me. There are links to get the book and download programs and all that stuff on there. So you can get all the information you need on either of those.
Awesome. I hope that listeners will do that and take advantage of that. And I find it so interesting that our paths started at the same way, in nutrition and weight loss, and then kind of both ended up in a similar place. I know coaching and counseling have a little bit differences, but still very, very, a lot of overlap. A lot of
similarities too. Yeah.
I just find that so interesting because I didn't know that about you when we first had our conversation. I knew the counseling part, but I did not know the nutrition background. And I was like, wow, she sounds like me.
I don't think I knew that about you either. Yeah.
Yeah. It really makes sense. And I think it's just proof that of what we said, that the patterns in one area are the patterns in the next, because there's so much crossover between coaching somebody in their career and coaching them to lose weight. It's literally like the same techniques. You're just applying it to something different. So
exactly.
I think that's fascinating. Well, thank you so much for your time. And I've learned a lot personally myself, and I know that listeners will too. So I really appreciate all of your insights and you taking the time out to join us today, Candice.
Oh, for sure. It was great to be here and great to chat with you about all this. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Yes. All right. Well, that wraps up our show. We've got a couple more guests lined up for the next couple of shows, and then I'll be doing some solo episodes over the summer. So it'll be back to just me, myself, and I. But thank you guys for listening. And you can learn more about me at careeruprising.com. And I will talk to you guys soon. Take care. That's it for today's show. Thank you so much for listening. If you like what you heard today, please consider giving the show a positive review on iTunes. It would mean a lot to me, and it would help to spread the word so that others can learn about the show. Thanks again for tuning in, and I can't wait to connect with you again next time on Career Uprising.
This show was brought to you by InflowRadio.com. The best curated talk radio network for personal development, wellness, spirituality, and conscious business.